Her father was murdered. His lands were stolen, and the only way to take it all back was to walk straight into the trap. Elara de Ashveil was once the heir to the most powerful territory in the realm, until the night fire swallowed her home, and a conspiracy buried her family's name in ash. For 3 years she survived in silence, hiding inside a convent walls, carrying a leather-bound cipher her father left behind. Pages of secrets she couldn't yet read, written in a code only grief could unlock. Then came the ultimatum: marry the man who helped orchestrate her family's downfall, or lose Ashveil forever. She said yes, because inside the enemy's castle was the only place she could search for the truth. She never expected to cross paths with him, the young king who moved through a crowded market like a man who owned the ground beneath it, who watched her take down 4 armed soldiers and simply asked, what if there had been 5? He knew who she was before she knew his name. He had been watching from a distance for 5 years. But why had he never come for her? Follow along to uncover the full story, because the truth is darker and far more beautiful than either of them expected. The eve of the wedding, St. Wren's Convent, Year 3. The candle had burned to half its length by the time Sister Marin placed the book in Elara's hands. Small, leather-bound, worn at the corners as if someone had carried it inside a coat for years, pressed against a heartbeat. Elara turned it over once, twice, feeling the grain of the hide beneath her fingertips before she let herself open the cover. Every page was cipher, symbol after symbol, packed tight in columns that ran edge to edge. Her father's hand, unmistakably. That particular slant to the strokes she had spent 15 years watching form letters and ledger entries, and the occasional verse on winter evenings when Ashveil was quiet and the fire was loud. She knew that hand the way she knew the sound of snow on stone. She knew it, and she could not read a single word of what it said. One line only. The first page, top margin, written in plain script. Elara, when you need the proof, you already have it. Your father trusts you to find the way. She sat with that for a long time. The smell of the convent at night came in through the thin window. Pine resin, cold stone, the faint sweetness of beeswax tapers burning somewhere in the chapel. Familiar. 3 years of this smell, and still her body had not fully decided whether it meant safety or captivity. Run. Do not look back, whatever you hear. She had run. Down the servants' stairs, through the kitchen passage, out the postern gate into a forest that smelled of smoke from the wrong direction. She had not stopped until Mira's face appeared in the convent doorway. Mira, who was 14 and had flour on her hands and asked no questions at all, who simply stepped aside and let her in. She had not looked back. That was the thing she could not forgive herself for. Not the running. The running was survival. She understood that now, in the cold logic of 3 years' distance. But the not looking back. As if by not seeing it, she could pretend there was still something to return to. Tomorrow she would leave for Ironcrest. Not because she had chosen it. Because Rowan Vale had spent 3 years as guardian of her father's lands, managing them with the patient efficiency of a man who had always expected to own them eventually. And now the Council of Lords had delivered an elegant ultimatum: marry him, gain the nominal title of Baroness and a fragile tether to Ashveil's affairs, or be formally displaced and watch a stranger be named Lord in her family's name. A trap, she knew, but a trap she was walking into with her eyes open, because inside the trap was the only place she could look for what she needed. The book sat heavy in her lap. She pressed her palm flat against the cover. Find the way. Something stirred at the edge of her awareness. Not a sound, not quite a thought. A warmth, like the moment before sleep when the body lets go of its vigilance and something older takes over. It lasted only a breath, then disappeared like an ember carried off by wind. She pushed it aside. Tomorrow, she told herself. First, tomorrow. 3 months after the wedding. Ironcrest Castle. The estate books were spread across the trestle table in the south solar, when Elara heard the gates open. She did not look up immediately. She finished the column she was adding, 6 lines of grain tallies from the eastern granaries, which told a story of systematic underweighting that the steward had apparently been comfortable with for years, and only then did she move to the window. The courtyard below filled with color, pennants, armor catching the late autumn light, men on horseback, mud-spattered and loud with the particular noise of soldiers who had survived something and wanted the world to know it. Rowan Vale rode at the front. He was a tall man, well-made, with the kind of face that had probably been striking at 20 and had since grown into something more deliberate. 42 years and a decade of command had arranged his features into expressions of certainty. He looked up at the windows as he crossed the courtyard, and Elara stepped back. Not out of fear, out of calculation. She heard, rather than saw, the woman who rode beside him. Heard the soldiers change note. Louder, different, the pitch of men performing admiration rather than feeling it. She looked again. Dame Vessa Thornwall. Elara had heard the name at the convent, carried in by travelers who stopped for water and stayed to gossip. The woman who ended the war at Coldfen, the knight who kept the northern pass. She was dark-haired, broad-shouldered, and she surveyed the courtyard with the calm of someone who had already decided it belonged to her. Her gaze found Elara in the window. Something in the woman's expression shifted. Not hostile, not yet. More like a craftsman appraising a piece of work and finding it less interesting than expected. Elara turned away from the window and went back to the estate books. 3 hours later, Rowan stood in the south solar with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the table as if the ledgers were personally offensive. "What have you done with my estate?" "Increased its revenues by 30%. Elara did not look up from the page she was annotating. "The grain merchant on the Caldmere Road has been shorting your steward for 4 years. I renegotiated the contract. Would you like to see the figures?" The silence that followed had texture. She had learned to read the texture of Rowan's silences. This one was the kind that preceded reorganization, a man reassessing the board he thought he understood. "You had no authority to—" "I had no authority to do nothing." She set down her quill and looked at him then, steadily. "Your tenants were going hungry. Your granaries were half empty going into winter. I addressed it. If that offends you, tell me precisely which part of the law forbids a baroness from conducting estate business in her husband's absence." The law said nothing of the kind. They both knew it. Mira, standing near the door with a basket of mending that had served as her excuse to be present, caught Elara's eye for just a fraction of a moment. She had followed Elara from the convent on the morning of the wedding, simply appeared at the gate with a small pack and the expression of someone who had made a decision and was done discussing it. "You're building their loyalty," she had said, the first week, watching Elara resolve a boundary dispute between 2 farming families that the steward had let fester for 2 years. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," Elara had answered. "You're doing both." Now Mira was carefully not looking at anything in particular, which was Mira's way of listening with her entire body. Rowan left without answering. That was, Elara had come to understand, his particular form of concession. The council meeting, 2 weeks later, was Rowan's counterattack. He had called it formally, seating arranged, scribes present, the stone-faced minor lords of Ironcrest's vassal holdings arranged along both sides of the long table. Elara was seated at the foot, which was either a position of honor or of isolation, depending on how you read the room. She had decided before entering that she would read it neither way. Rowan stood. The charge was bloodless, unable to transform, unfit to hold the title of baroness, a weakness in the line that reflected poorly on Ironcrest and on the Vale name. The silence that followed his statement was the kind that invites a response. Elara stood. "My lord husband has raised an interesting legal question." Her voice carried without effort. Her father had made her practice that in the great hall at Ashveil, reading aloud until the echo was comfortable rather than frightening. "Could someone please show me the statute that empowers a husband to strip his wife of her title before this council, without documented cause, formal charge, and a hearing on her behalf? She watched the scribes exchange glances. The lords at the table did not move. No one? She let the pause hold for exactly 3 seconds. I thought so. Thank you, gentlemen. I believe we're finished. She walked out. Mira fell into step 2 paces behind. They were halfway up the stair when Mira murmured, low, "That was either brilliant or the most dangerous thing you've done yet." "Both," Elara said. That night, Mira poured 2 cups of wine and set one on the window ledge beside Elara without comment. The fire had burned low. Somewhere below, the castle was settling into its nighttime quiet. The last of the guards changing, the kitchen fires banked, the particular silence of a large building deciding to rest. "Mira," Elara said, after a while, "I'm living in the house of the man who helped destroy my family. I don't have proof yet. I don't have enough." She looked at the wine, not at Mira. "There's nothing to celebrate." Mira sat down on the bench beside her, said nothing. After a moment, she reached over and refilled both cups. The silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind that did not require filling. 4 months after the wedding, Caldmere Market Town. The market at Caldmere smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, and the particular sharpness of river fish laid out on boards in the cold morning air. Elara kept her hood up and her pace unhurried. Mira had been left behind. One person was less noticeable than 2, and the person she was looking for would not speak if he saw an audience. She had memorized his usual spot from her father's letters. The spice merchant's stall, 3rd aisle in from the eastern gate, always on the Tuesday market. She needed Corvin. 12 names made up the shadow council her father had built over 2 decades. 12 people sworn to Ashveil above all else. Corvin was the eldest, the one who had been there from the beginning, the one who might know why the cipher was built on a Latin verse about candlelight. She needed someone who could teach her to read it. She had made it as far as the 2nd aisle before one of Rowan's guards recognized the jade bracelet she had forgotten to leave at the castle. They came at her from 3 sides. 4 of them. Male shirts. No swords drawn. Rowan would not want a scene, would want her simply returned. She assessed this in the time it took to stop walking. The market crowd had not yet noticed. She was standing between a baker's stall and a tanner's cart, which gave her the seller's boards on her left as a partial screen. "My Lady Baroness?" The lead guard, Hendrik, she knew him, 40 years old and careful, kept his voice low. "The Baron requests your return to. I heard you the first time." She watched his hands, not reaching yet. "I'm not a prisoner, Hendrik." "No one said." "Then you won't mind stepping back." He didn't step back. Of course he didn't. She had known he wouldn't. The man nearest to her right shifted his weight, and that was the tell she had been waiting for. A fighter's preparation. The slight forward lean before commitment. She moved into it rather than away from it. Her hand found the edge of his pauldron, and she used the momentum she had borrowed from him to direct his considerable weight sideways and down. He hit the packed earth with a sound that made the baker's wife look over. 3 pairs of eyes. 3 men who were no longer certain. She straightened, hands open. She turned. The man who had started clapping was leaning against the tanner's cart with the relaxed posture of someone who had nowhere more pressing to be. He was watching her, with the kind of attention that she recognized from her father's war councils. The attention of someone who never misses anything and is not trying to hide the fact that he doesn't miss anything. Handsome wasn't the right word. Handsome was for men who were well-arranged, pleasant to look at, good at standing in firelight. What she was looking at had been cut from something harder. Dark hair, loose at his collar. Eyes the color of winter granite, which in the morning light of the market had taken on the particular flat quality of a sky before snow. He was perhaps 3 years older than her and dressed like a merchant. Good cloth, no insignia. And he was not remotely believable as a merchant. "Good technique," he said. But if there had been 5 of them? She looked at him for a moment. This stranger who watched fights in marketplaces, and applauded with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never in his life been uncertain about where he stood. "Then I would have found a way with 5. She turned and walked toward the eastern gate. She did not look back. She had learned not to look back. At the tanner's cart, the man she was not looking at turned to the older man beside him. Who was that? Sir Algis had the expression of someone who had been anticipating exactly this question, and was not sure whether to be relieved or alarmed that it had finally arrived. "Elara de Ashveil," he said carefully. "Baroness of Ironcrest, by marriage, daughter of the late Lord Aldrich. And the person your Majesty identified as his fated mate 5 years ago, when you were both considerably younger." King Caelan Dawnmere said nothing for a long moment. He had already turned back to watch her, the dark hood moving through the crowd, the unhurried pace of a woman who was too careful to run and too proud to hurry. And something in his expression had gone very still. Before the market closed, she bought a bundle of wild field flowers from a child selling near the gate, overpaying by twice the asking price. He heard her tell the child to use the extra for supper. He turned to Aldous and said very quietly, "Find out why the wife of Rowan Vale needs to visit a market alone, and find out who she was looking for." Still the 4th month. Ironcrest. The garden on the south side of Ironcrest was the only place Elara could be certain of not being watched from behind a wall. She had mapped the sightlines in her 2nd week. The south wall was blind from the upper windows. The only view was from the kitchen garden gate, and the cook's boy had an understanding with her about where he pointed his attention. She came here to think, and sometimes to open the cipher book and hold it until the frustration of not understanding it became something she could put back in her pocket and carry, rather than something that sat in her chest like a splinter. She was doing exactly that, the book open on her knees, staring at a column of symbols that had defeated her for 2 months, when she heard the gate latch. Not the kitchen gate, the wall gate, the one she had not mapped. The one she had not mapped because it was supposed to be sealed. The man who came through it was not dressed like a king. He was dressed like someone who had given up on being dressed at all by court standards. A plain riding coat, dark, and boots that had seen actual use. No guard, no banner. The gate swung shut behind him. She did not stand. Standing would imply surprise, and she had decided before she finished looking at him that she was not going to give him surprise. "The king," she said, "is visiting my husband's castle without announcement." He stopped a few feet from her bench. The afternoon light was behind him, which put his face in partial shadow and meant she could not read his expression until he moved, which he did, stepping aside so the light fell differently, and what she saw in his face then was careful, contained, a man choosing what to show. "I want to talk to you about your father," he said. The cipher book was in her hands. She closed it deliberately. "What do you know about my father?" He sat down in the chair across from her, without asking, without looking to see if she objected. Simply sat, as if proximity to furniture implied ownership of it. The kind of certainty that was bred into people from birth, she supposed. The kind that stopped feeling arrogant to the person who had it, because it had never been questioned. "This," she said, "is my husband's garden, which makes it, by marriage and misfortune, currently mine. You are a guest here. Guests ask before they sit." He looked at her with an expression she could not entirely categorize. Then he stood, straightened, and with an irony that was precise rather than mocking, he bowed. Not the half-bow of court courtesy, but the full, formal inclination, weight forward. The gesture that said, "You are owed this," and said, "May I sit, my lady?" "You may," she said. He sat. The corner of her mouth moved. She looked back down at the cipher book before it could develop further. 6 days later, Heloise Vale went pale at dinner, and by morning had a fever that climbed and kept climbing. The castle physician tried 3 treatments in 2 days, and the fever did not break. Agnes was summoned. Agnes was not sent for. Agnes was summoned by Rowan, hat in hand, in the doorway of Elara's solar, at a time of the afternoon when the light came in at the angle that made everything look like a painting and made the powerlessness of proud men look almost gentle. When Elara had arrived at Ironcrest 3 months prior, she had brought Agnes with her. The healer had served Ashveil for 20 years, and Elara had seen no reason to leave her behind when the estate itself was being stripped away piece by piece. Agnes had taken one look at Ironcrest's sick room and said nothing, which was Agnes's way of saying a great deal. Now Rowan stood in the doorway with a sentence that refused to finish itself. Agnes is employed by the estates of Ashveil, which are currently administered by me, Elara said, without looking up from the letter she was writing. She works for the land, not for a house. If you would like to make a request— I am asking, Rowan said. She looked up. His face was contained in the way that had always made her cautious, not because he was losing control, but because he was working very hard not to, which in her experience meant the thing being controlled was large. Agnes stays, she said, and your mother will have the best care available in 3 counties. That is my first condition. We can discuss the others when your mother is well. He held her gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he left. Agnes arrived within the hour, assessed the situation in 20 minutes with the calm of a woman who had seen most things twice, and began treatment. Heloise's fever broke on the 4th day. By the end of the month, she was downstairs again, color in her cheeks, moving through the castle with the renewed vigor of someone who had been reminded that life was finite and found the reminder bracing. Elara noted the recovery without celebration. The debt had been recorded. It would be collected in time. Still the 4th month. Ironcrest's library. It was Mira who broke it. She was not trying to. She was sitting in the corner of the library, working on a hem, while Elara read aloud from the cipher book. Not to decode, just to hear the rhythm of it. To see if the rhythm of the symbols contained a pattern she could feel, rather than calculate. She had been doing this for weeks. Her voice had taken on the toneless quality of practice. And then Mira said, without looking up, "Is that the same thing your father used to sing? The Latin one, about the candle." Elara stopped. "Say that again." "The bit you just read, the rhythm of it." Mira bit off a thread. "He sang it at the autumn council when you were, 7, 8? I was there with my mother. He sang it after the toasts, about how a candle doesn't know it gives light. Nescit se lucere, a Latin verse. Not complicated. 3 stanzas, a children's teaching verse. The kind of thing a father with a literary inclination might read to a daughter every evening for years, until she knew it so well she stopped hearing it. Until it became the key to everything. Elara worked until the 3rd bell of the night. By the time Mira had fallen asleep in the window seat with a blanket pulled over her shoulders, the first 20 pages had yielded themselves up, and the name that appeared in them, repeated, underlined, annotated with a patience that suggested her father had been building a case for years, was Vessa Thornwall. Thornwall has been meeting with representatives of the Ironback clan, her father had written, in the clear, unhurried script of a man documenting what he hoped he was wrong about. Not for the purposes of negotiation, for the purposes of transaction. She needs a conflict. She needs a resolution. She needs the story of both to build her name on. Elara set down her quill. The fire had gone to embers. She sat very still in the orange half-light and let the full weight of it settle. Her father had known. He had been watching. He had been writing it all down in a code she could not read until she was ready. Until she was old enough, desperate enough, and still enough to hear an old verse the way she had heard it at 7, sitting on a cold stone floor while her father read to her about candlelight. The king came back on the 3rd day after. He arrived through the wall gate again at mid-afternoon, when the light was the color of cold honey and the garden smelled of frost-touched rosemary from the border beds. She heard his footstep on the gravel the moment the gate closed. She had been listening for it, which was a thing she had not admitted to herself until she heard it, and her shoulders dropped a fraction. She did not turn around. "Sit down," she said, "and before you point out that you didn't ask, I'm inviting you." He sat. She heard him adjust, the slight shift of someone settling into a chair with the intention of staying, and then his silence, which was not the silence of someone waiting to speak, but of someone choosing to be present without filling the space. She turned and placed the decoded pages in front of him. "My proof," she said, "in my father's hand." Vesa Thornwall was coordinating with the Ironback clan 7 years ago. Not for peace, for leverage. She needed a conflict and a resolution, and my father was the obstacle in the first half of that plan. She kept her voice level. It cost her something. "You said the Shadow Council was being monitored from inside. You've known about Thornwall for 6 months. What is your proof?" "Movement maps," he said, and reached into his coat. "Ironback clan movements that correlate with Thornwall's military schedule in a way that shouldn't be possible if the two groups weren't in contact." He placed a folded map on top of her pages. She looked at the map. He looked at her notes. The candle on the table burned between them. Somewhere in the castle, a door opened and closed. A dog barked once and was silenced. After a while, he leaned forward to see something more clearly, and for a moment, the distance between them was wrong, too short, the way space sometimes compressed itself in firelight, and she became aware of him in the specific physical way that was inconvenient and that she had been successfully ignoring since the market. The smell of him reached her, something cold and clean and faintly of leather, the way the forest smelled in November. She moved back slightly. He noticed. She was certain he noticed. He said nothing, but there was a quality to the way he found a different position, careful, deliberate, that suggested he was making a choice rather than reacting to one. "Corvin," she said, "in the Shadow Council. He was the one I was looking for at Caldmere." "He's the one." Caelan confirmed it without shifting his eyes from the map. "We've known his name for 6 months, the same time as Thornwall. He'd been feeding her information about your father's investigation for over a year before the massacre. 3 weeks ago, my men took him quietly at a wool fair outside Dawnmere. He's in the capital now, under guard, with enough evidence against him that he answered every question we asked." Corvin, who had been her father's most trusted man. She filed this in the place she kept for things that could not be changed and needed to stop taking up room. "Who ordered him?" "Thornwall," Caelan said. Directly. Vale knew the shape of the plan, but Thornwall was the architect. He looked up from the map then, and his eyes were the color of iron in the candlelight. Not cold, precisely, but clear the way cold things are clear, undistorted. "Your father suspected her. He was 2 months away from having enough to act on." She absorbed this. "And you knew all of it for 6 months," she said, and said nothing. "I knew the shape of it, not the proof." He looked at the decoded pages. "Your father's record is the proof. That's why it mattered that you found it." From the corridor, invisible in the shadow near the doorway, Mira watched the two of them bent over maps and cipher pages by candlelight, and thought several things in sequence that she had the self-discipline not to say out loud. She went back to her room. She did not say any of them. The 5th month. Ironcrest. Then the capital. The dissolution conversation lasted 40 minutes and accomplished nothing. Elara had prepared her position the way her father had taught her to prepare legal arguments, with the assumption that the other side was not stupid, and that the only sustainable victory was the one that accounted for every possible counter. She sat across from Rowan in the estate office and laid out her terms with the clarity of someone who had been rehearsing for 3 years. Rowan's counter was also prepared. It was also not stupid. "The bloodless law," he said, with the particular evenness of a man wielding a document rather than a weapon, "does not become void upon dissolution of a marriage. You would require a guardian regardless. The council would appoint one. That guardian would not be you." The law was real. She had found it 2 months ago and spent a week looking for the loophole, because her father had always told her that every law had one. She had not found it yet. Vesa moved in the doorway behind Rowan. She had been there for the last 10 minutes, silent. She did not need to speak to make a presence felt. "Sign over half of Ashveil's holdings," Vesa said. "Keep the title. Live quietly somewhere. That's a better offer than most women in your position would receive." "A fair agreement," Elara said, "requires both parties to want to sign it." She held Vesa's gaze. "I don't." Rowan put his hands flat on the table. "Elara." His voice had changed. Lower, stripped of the official tone, something older and less managed in it. "I loved you when we were younger. Before all of this. You know I did." She looked at him. The man who had stood at her father's funeral with the expression of a mourner and the agenda of an accountant. The man who had waited with the patience of someone who had decided the outcome in advance and was simply allowing time to confirm it. "I know," she said. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me." "Then you used my father's death to take what you wanted. And when I didn't respond to being owned, you punished me for it." She stood. "Those are two different things, Rowan. You can love someone and still have wronged them beyond repair." The silence after this was a different quality. Vesa's expression, in her peripheral vision, had gone very careful. Elara walked out. The king was at the council. She knew this before she saw him, because Aldous was at the door, standing beside the entrance with the studied nonchalance of a man pretending he was simply there to breathe the morning air. And Aldous went where Caelan went. Inside, Caelan stood before the council table, with the ease of someone who owned every surface he stood on. He was in formal dress today. She noticed the difference from his market appearance, the way you notice the difference between a wolf in motion and a wolf sitting still. The quality was identical. The impression was entirely different. "The direct inheritance decree," he said, setting a scroll on the table with the unhurried certainty of a man who had already counted his votes. "A sole female heir of any landed estate may hold and administer that estate independently upon personal royal sanction, without requirement of male guardianship." The room moved against him immediately. 3 lords speaking at once, the language of objection, the careful phrasing of men who had interests to protect and knew it. "Rowan, your Majesty has no jurisdiction over—" "Property law is the Crown's jurisdiction." Caelan's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I am not touching your marriage. I am touching the statute that has been used for the last 3 years to strip a woman of her birthright while calling it protection." His eyes moved to her briefly across the room. Not a question, a statement. "This is what I can do." She held the look for a moment, then looked away first. 2 weeks passed. Caelan spent them moving between liegemen's halls and council chambers, making the arguments in person rather than by messenger, a thing no king had done for a decree in living memory. Sir Aldous told her this, not because she asked, but because he appeared to feel she should know. The decree passed at 4-3 in the League Council. She heard it through Mira, who had heard it through the castle's kitchen, which was where all real information arrived first. She was in the garden, the blind south garden, her father's cipher book open on the bench beside her, when the gate opened and Caelan came through carrying the royal seal of Ashveil in his closed fist. He stopped in front of her, held it out. She took it. His fingers were warm. She registered this before she registered anything else. The warmth of him against the late autumn cold, and neither of them moved for a beat that lasted longer than it had any right to. "It was always yours," he said. She looked down at the seal, the Ashveil crest, a wolf rampant on a silver field, worn smooth at the edges from her father's hands. She had not seen it in 3 years. She did not withdraw her hand immediately. Still the 5th month, Dawnmere, the royal seat. The king's reasons for keeping her in the capital were, as she told him, practical, and she could accept them. Rowan would make a move before the decree's ink was dry if she returned to Ironcrest alone. Better to be in Dawnmere, where the law had just been written, than in his hall, where custom had been the only law for 3 years. She did not tell him that Mira's observation, "He looks at you in a way I wouldn't describe in front of clergy," had produced a reaction in her she was still choosing to categorize as something other than what it was. The training yard was empty at the 7th hour, which was why she used it. She had been at it for an hour. The forms her father had taught her, the footwork that lived in her body so deeply it required no thought, just the morning cold and the familiar ache of muscles waking. When she heard someone enter the yard behind her, she kept her form. "The forward weight on your left foot," Caelan said from somewhere to her right. "When you pivot, it's a habit." "I know." She did not look at him. "My father told me." And I've never been killed by it yet." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, brief and genuine, the kind that escaped before it could be considered. She finished the form and turned. He was standing at the edge of the yard in a coat that was clearly not chosen for warmth. He had come here from inside somewhere, from sleep, or from work, or from one of those indefinite small hours places that kings probably occupied when no one was requiring them to be kings. His hair was not entirely arranged. She noticed this. She looked away from it. "You know cavalry?" she said. "I know everything my father thought was worth teaching before a battle took him." He moved to the weapons rack along the wall. His hands moved over the practice swords with the familiarity of someone who had spent real time with them. "Your father was a better teacher." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew him." "I respected him." He turned, holding one of the practice blades. "Before what happened, I admired the way he thought. He was one of the few lords who told me the truth instead of what he thought I wanted to hear." He looked at the blade, not at her. "I was at the autumn session when it happened. I heard 3 days later. By the time I knew where you were—" "You came to St. Ren's," she said. He went still. "I saw you," she said quietly, "from the upper window, 3 years ago. You stopped at the edge of the convent road and stood there for a while. Then you left." "Your mother's letter," he said. "It came that morning." She let that sit between them. Outside, somewhere above the training yard walls, a rook gave its flat winter cry and was answered by another. "She was afraid for you," he said finally. "She thought I would bring danger to you. She wasn't wrong." "She was wrong about one thing," Elara said. She picked up the second practice blade from the rack, turned it once in her hand to feel the balance. "She thought I needed protecting from danger. I was already living inside it." She took her position. "Show me what my father taught you," she said. That night, the corridor outside the guest quarters was unlit at the 4th bell, the torches long since taken by the watch, who needed them more than the sleeping guests did. Elara had been raised at a convent for 3 years, and before that, at a castle, and she was not afraid of the dark, but she was not sleeping either. And at some point, the ceiling of the guest room had stopped offering anything new to look at. She pulled a blanket over her shoulders and walked. The window at the end of the east corridor looked out over the river town below the hill, the lights of the last alehouses, the dark bulk of the Guildhall, the particular shapeless silver of the river in winter moonlight. She stood with her forehead close to the cold glass and watched a cart cross the bridge. "You can't sleep either." She had heard his step before he spoke. She was cataloging sounds she should not know yet, the specific rhythm of his walk, and she turned. He was less dressed than she had seen him before. Not carelessly. She did not think he did anything carelessly, but without the armor of formality that court dress provided. A loose shirt, dark trousers. The lines of him in the half-dark were plainer, and somehow, because of that, more difficult to look at steadily. "Conscience?" she asked. "Probably." He stopped a few feet from her, facing the window. "Your father used to say, 'The sleepless nights are the nights the conscience speaks.'" She had said it first. She saw him turn, just slightly, to look at her. "He told me that when I was 9 and couldn't sleep before an examination. I told him examinations were not a matter of conscience. She looked back at the river. He said everything was. The window between them and the sleeping city was cold, the kind of cold that seeped in at the edges of even the best-fitted glass. She was aware of the warmth to her left. He was perhaps 3 feet away, the warmth of him coming to her in the still air of the corridor. And she was aware that she had not moved away from it. He was right, Caelan said. Not to fill the silence, just to place that there. She thought of the cipher book, the 7 years of careful documentation her father had written, not knowing if anyone would ever read it. The patience of a man who believed that the truth, properly recorded, would eventually matter. I know, she said. She did not go back to her room for another hour. Neither did he. They stood at the window and watched the city sleep, and did not say very much, and it was the most understood she had felt in 3 years. In the morning, in the library where they had spread the decoded pages weeks before, he placed a letter on the table between them. Her mother's hand. The seal broken. He had read it before now, she realized. He had been carrying it since St. Ren's. You should have this, he said. She did not open it, not yet. She turned it over in her hands. She asked you not to find me, she said. Yes. And you listened. I respected what she asked. He looked at her, the direct look she had come to recognize, the one that did not perform anything. I am not sure now that respecting it was the same as honoring it. She set the letter beside her father's seal, 2 objects that had existed in 2 different silences, side by side now. I'll read it, she said. When I'm ready. He nodded. He did not push. This, she was beginning to understand, was what he always did. He stated his position, clearly, and then he waited. He did not fill the space. He did not repeat himself. It was, she was finding, the most difficult thing to argue with. The 6th month, Dawnmere and the road north. The message arrived before dawn. It came through the channel Caelan had established after Corvin's removal, a route that ran through a wine merchant's network, clean of the old Shadow Council's compromised lines. The messenger was a boy, freckled and serious, who delivered a sealed letter to Aldous and accepted breakfast without appearing to find the exchange unusual. Vesa was moving. The Ironback clan was massing at the northern border of Ashveil, with a claimed grievance that was 7 years old, and a stated intention that was not ambiguous. Vesa and a company of Ironcrest soldiers were riding north, not to negotiate, to confirm. Elara read the message twice, and then set it down. I need to go back. You don't have a standing army. I have people. She looked at him. I have 7 years of accumulated loyalty from people who watched their lord's daughter disappear and didn't forget her. Half of Ashveil's stable hands have been sending me information through the wool merchants since my first month at Ironcrest. They know I'm coming. I have the decoded evidence. I have a case I can make before Vesa gets there first and poisons whatever ground is left. Elara, what you were going to say is that you don't want me to be killed. She said it plainly, without inflection. I heard it already, in the garden. It's the only time you've said a true thing without hiding it behind a reason. He said nothing. In the morning light from the solar window, the gray of his eyes had taken on a different quality. Not cold, the way it was in crowds and councils, but open in a way that was not comfortable for him. She could see that it was not comfortable for him. That, she said more gently, is not a small thing to say. I know it isn't. She picked up the message again. But I cannot be kept safe while my home burns. He said, what I want to say, and what I have no right to say, are 2 different things. She stopped. You have spent 5 years knowing something about me that I didn't know. You have made decisions about that, about me, that I would have made differently. And now you're saying you have no right. She looked at him. Is that guilt, or is it respect? A long pause. Both, he said. Today, both. She had known it would be both. She had known for weeks, probably. Had known it in the training yard, and at the window, and over the cipher pages by candlelight. Known it in the particular quality of his attention, which was not the attention of someone performing consideration, but of someone actually considering. She had been putting this knowledge in the pocket with the other things that could not be changed, and needed to stop taking up room. She was not sure the pocket was large enough anymore. She left at midnight. Mira's performance as a sleeping figure in the guest quarters lasted until the third watch. She had dressed in Elara's traveling cloak and arranged herself under the covers with the theater of someone who had grown up in a convent and understood the value of seeming invisible. The merchant's horse was reliable, if not fast, and the road north was clear in the cold starlight. She left a note. "Thank you for your reason. This is mine. E." She heard him at the first gray edge of dawn and the road behind her. She did not stop. She did not slow. But when the sound of hooves came alongside, and she looked over and found him there, just him, just Aldous, 100 yards back, no royal escort, no banners, riding in the specific way of a man who has decided something and is done deciding. Something in her chest did something she was not going to name yet. "You came," she said. "I told you." "You told me nothing." "That I'm telling you now." He matched her pace. The horses moved together in the early light, their breath clouding in the cold air. "I'm not here to stop you. I'm here because—" "Because?" He looked at her. The light was coming up gray gold over the hills to the east, and in it his face was entirely unguarded in a way she had not seen before. Not the careful, measured openness of the corridor at midnight, but something rawer, something that had not been prepared. "Because," he said, "I am tired of standing at a distance from the things that matter to me." She turned back to the road ahead. Her hands on the reins were very still. Still the 6th month, the Ironback camp. The gates of Ashveil were visible through the tree line when she turned her horse away from them. Darian's camp was to the north. She had seen the smoke from the ridge, the particular blue-gray of a war camp's cook fires in the morning cold. She was aware of Caelan behind her, aware of the brief silence when he understood that she was not heading for her own gates. She heard him say nothing. She heard him turn his horse after hers. The Ironback sentries were not expecting a lone woman on an unremarkable horse. This was, she had calculated, her best advantage. She stopped at the outer perimeter and called out in a clear voice. "I am Elara de Ashveil. I'm unarmed. I need to speak with Thane Darian. I am not here to fight." 3 sentries, 2 spears raised. One of them, young, uncertain in the particular way of men who had trained for a confrontation that was not arriving in the expected shape, looked to the others for instruction. She waited. They brought her in. He was taller than she remembered. She had known Darian Ironback when he was 14 and she was 12, and the 2 households had still been on speaking terms, which meant summer councils and harvest celebrations, and the specific boredom of children at formal dinners who had been told to behave. She remembered a boy who collected carved animals and was mortified about it and tried to hide them under his seat whenever anyone looked. The man who walked out of the command tent was not that boy, but he stopped when he saw her, and something crossed his face before his expression could close over it. Recognition, and beneath recognition, the complicated grief of someone who has been angry for a very long time and has just been handed a reason to doubt the anger. "Elara," he said. "Darian," she said. 7 years in a single breath of silence. She put the cipher book on the camp table. "Read it," she said. "All of it. And then I have someone for you to meet." He read it. He read it twice, standing, while Elara sat across from him and watched the fire and did not watch him. The witness stood near the tent entrance and waited to be asked to speak. An older man, weathered, with the careful stillness of someone who has been carrying a truth for a long time and is finally being given permission to set it down. He had been a garrison soldier at the border crossing 7 years ago. He had seen what happened after the battle. Caelan had found him 18 months prior, kept him safe, brought him north this morning. When Darian finally set down the pages and looked up, Caelan nodded once. The witness spoke. He spoke for 4 minutes without interruption. When he finished, the tent was very quiet. Lord Aldrich's men had the Ironback Thane on the ground, he said at the end. Alive. I saw it. And then Thornwall arrived with her unit, and he was dead. And the story was already being told a different way. The silence that followed was the kind that changed things permanently. 7 years, Darian said. 7 years, He stopped, looked at the book, looked at Elara. My father was alive when Aldrich's man left the field. Yes, she said. The fire popped. Outside, the camp was going about its morning, unaware that the shape of everything had just changed. Your people didn't know, she said. My people didn't know. We were both handed a story. She looked at him, the boy who had hidden his carved animals, the man who had spent 7 years preparing for a war he had been taught he owed. The question is, what we do with the truth now that we have it. Vesa arrived at noon, with 30 men and a formal proclamation from Ironcrest. She did not expect to find the king's standard planted beside Elara's. She did not expect Elara to be standing outside the Ironback tent with Darian beside her, and both of them looking at her with the particular calm of people who have already finished a conversation she was not included in. She recovered quickly. Vesa always recovered quickly. It was the quality that had made her dangerous. She dismounted. She squared her shoulders. She let her voice carry. You are inciting an enemy clan against your own borders, she said to Elara. You are a traitor to... Challenge her, Darian said. Vesa stopped. Old law, he said. Noble combat. If you believe she has no right to stand here, challenge her, in front of all of us. The pause that followed was the precise length of a woman recalculating. She has no blood, Vesa said. She cannot transform. This is not an equal. I accept, Elara said. She had not expected it to be easy. She had expected it to hurt. Vesa was everything her reputation claimed. Fast, technically precise, the kind of fighter who had won enough real battles that sparring had no surprises left in it. She came in on the left, and she committed to the left, because Elara's stance invited it, the forward weight on the left foot that her father had told her was a habit. It was a habit she had kept on purpose. She moved right. The weight Vesa committed carried forward into the space Elara had vacated, and Elara redirected it, not with strength, which she did not have in the same measure, but with the patient economy of someone who had learned to fight at a convent during the years when there was nothing to do but train and wait and remember. Vesa went down. She stayed down for 3 seconds. Then she rose, and her expression had lost the certainty. Yield, Caelan said from the edge of the circle. Absolute. A long moment. Yes, Vesa said. Afterward, when the camp was busy with the particular relief of people who had prepared for a war they didn't want, Caelan came to stand beside her. I knew, he said, about Thornwall, and I didn't tell you when I should have. She already knew. She had known since the library, when he had been so careful about the shape of what he withheld. She had spent 2 months deciding how angry she was going to be about it, and had arrived at something more complicated than anger. You thought I would act before the evidence was sufficient, she said. Yes. You were right. She turned to look at him. I would have. If you'd told me when you first knew, I would have gone straight to her and done something I couldn't take back. I don't like that you made the decision for me, but I understand why. I should have found a way to tell you sooner, he said. Yes. She looked at the camp, at the Ironback men putting out cook fires, at the shapes of Ashveil's own people moving through her gates in the distance. Thank you for not letting me destroy the only chance at proof I had, she said. And I expect you to never make that kind of decision for me again." She felt, rather than saw, something in him ease. "Understood," he said. Still the 6th month. Ashveil. The fire in the Ironback camp was burning low when Darian sat down across from her. Everyone else had gone. The witness had been escorted to the capital with the sealed evidence. Vesa had been taken under guard. Rowan had ridden in an hour after the combat, drawn by the same messenger lines that had brought Vesa, and he had stood at the edge of the firelight, understood what he was looking at, and spoken quietly to Caelan. Then he had turned and ridden back toward Ironcrest in the failing afternoon light, and she had watched him go, and felt something that was not quite pity and not quite forgiveness, but lived in the same country as both. Now it was the fire, and Darian, and the particular silence of two people who had known each other in a different version of the world. "I don't know how to give back 7 years," he said. "You can't." She fed a piece of wood into the fire. The sparks rose and dispersed. "That's not the offer I'm making. I'm not asking for restitution." She looked at him, the man, not the memory. "I'm asking what you want for your people in the next 7 years. What you want that you're not currently able to get. And whether any of that could be better achieved beside Ashveil than against it." He was quiet for a long time. "The northern fishing rights," he said finally. "I know," she said. "My father was prepared to negotiate them 3 years before he died. I found the drafts in his papers." Darian looked at her. "He was going to offer," she said. "He never got the chance." The fire crackled. Above the camp, the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. Two people who had grown up knowing each other's names as friends sat in the firelight and wrote the beginning of something that should have existed 7 years ago, talking about fish and border paths and grain access and the practical architecture of not going to war with your neighbor. And it was the most ordinary and the most necessary conversation she had conducted in 3 years. When Rowan appeared the following morning to say that the decree had no retroactive force and the treaty she was negotiating was therefore invalid, Caelan said, without looking up from the document Elara had asked him to witness, "The decree was ratified under emergency clause on the 15th. Retroactive force is standard in emergency procedure. I signed the personal royal sanction before we left Dawnmere." The firelight caught the edge of Rowan's expression, the particular stillness of a man who has been outmaneuvered so completely and so quietly that the only dignified response is silence. He said nothing more. Vesa, taken under guard to the capital, looked at Elara once before the escort departed. "You think you've won," she said. "I think," Elara said, "that the truth has been said out loud. That's all I came for." A week later, the League Council's ruling arrived by sealed letter. Guardianship nullified. Revenues from Ashveil's 3 years under Vale administration to be returned. Ironcrest to retain its own lands without claim on any neighboring holding. In the great hall at Ironcrest, which had been her father's hall before the documents were altered and the names were changed, Rowan Vale sat alone. He had loved something once. He had made the mistake that love, when it is not returned, tends to make, which is to confuse wanting with deserving. The choosing had cost him more than he had expected to pay. He sat at the empty table. No one came. No one was expected. The 7th month. Dawnmere, the Great Hall. The morning of the investiture, Heloise Vale, recovered fully from her illness of the spring, walking with the renewed certainty of someone who had nearly lost the ability to walk and found the recovery bracing, moved through the Great Hall at Dawnmere, spreading doubt with the precision of a woman who had been doing it for decades. "The white wolf is an ill omen," she said, in the quiet voice that carries. "A woman without blood cannot hold a territory. Have you heard?" Elara did not hear her. She was watching the hall the way her father had taught her to watch a room. Not at the center, where the spectacle was, but at the edges, where the truth was. She watched the lords who had voted 4-3. She watched Darian, standing near the north door in his clan's blue wool, looking like what he was. A man who had come, not as a subject, but as a neighbor. She watched Mira, small and unreadable in her corner, who had followed her from a convent door in the rain 3 years ago, and had not once, in all the time since, asked for anything in return. The ceremony was formal and correct. The decree was read aloud. The seal was presented. Caelan's voice, reading the words, had the quality it always had in official settings. Clear, absolute. The voice of a man who had learned to wield words the way other men wielded steel. Lady of Ashveil, holder of the northern domain, heir of the house of... When it was done, Heloise's voice rose again, deliberate, cutting across the brief silence. A bloodless wolf, a woman who cannot transform. This is not a lord. This is... Elara walked to the center of the hall. She stopped. This is it, something inside her said. Not the voice she had been pushing aside for months, but something older and clearer. The warmth that had woken in the convent on the eve of the wedding and grown slowly through every month since. She had been choosing when to open the lock. She had been waiting for the moment to feel like hers, rather than someone else's necessity. Lyra, she thought. Now. The transformation was not painful. It was like setting down a weight she had not known she was still carrying. The white wolf that stood in the center of the Dawnmere Great Hall was large. Larger than the other wolves in the hall by a full measure. And pure. The white of new snow before anything has walked on it. She stood very still. Her eyes, in the light of 100 candles, held the pale gold of winter morning. The hall went silent. Darian knelt first, cleanly, without hesitation, the gesture of a man who had made his decision before he arrived that morning. Then Mira, and this cost Mira something, Elara knew, who did not kneel as a habit and was doing it now because it was true, rather than because it was required. Then, one by one, the others. Rowan placed his hand on his mother's arm. Enough, he said, very quietly. That was all. Caelan watched from across the hall with an expression she had not seen before, something without a name she knew yet, something that sat in his face, the way the first light of a long winter sits on old stone, quiet, certain, permanent. Later, when the hall was thinning, Caelan found her at the east window. She had returned to herself, the transformation in reverse, just as quiet as the first. The borrowed weight was back, but it sat differently now, not heavier, just more honestly placed. You chose when, he said. I didn't want to be forced into it. She turned to look at him. There's a difference between deciding you're ready and being pushed to the edge and having no other choice. He was quiet for a moment. You are, he said, unlike anyone I have ever met. Is that an observation or a complaint? Both. And the slight curve at the corner of his mouth was genuine, unguarded, the specific smile of a man who had not smiled easily and was surprised to find himself doing it now. She found herself returning it before she decided to. Elara, he said, and something in the way he said it, just her name, without the formal weight, without the layer of king and lady and all the architecture that had stood between them, made her still. I'm not asking you for anything. I want to be clear about that. He paused, chose the words with the care she had learned to recognize in him. I'm asking whether you want to know where this goes. This, she said. You and I. Plainly, no decoration. She looked at him. The gray of his eyes had changed. Not cold, not the winter sky gray of the market or the council chamber, but something warmer and uncertain in a way she had not seen before. She found, unexpectedly, that she preferred it to certainty. I need time, she said. I know. Not because I don't know my own mind. She needed him to understand this. Because I want to know it from somewhere other than exhaustion and the specific feeling of having just survived something difficult. I want to choose clearly. Yes, he said. That's the right reason. She nodded. He did not press. He did not fill the silence with reassurance. He stood with her at the window while the hall behind them gradually emptied, and did not require anything of her except her presence. This, she thought, was the thing that was different about him from every other person who had wanted something from her. He wanted her to choose. 1 week later. Ashveil. Mira found the letter in the chest with her father's winter clothes, tucked between a folded wool cloak and a set of accounts books he had kept from the early years of his lordship. It had Elara's name on the outside, in her mother's hand. The seal was unbroken. Elara sat with it in the solar for a long time before she opened it. The solar at Ashveil smelled of pine and old stone, and the faint sweetness of the lavender her mother had dried and hung from the window beam every summer. She had forgotten that. She had forgotten there were things here she had lost that were not terrible. Things she had simply stopped being able to hold alongside the terrible ones. She opened the letter. My girl, I don't know when you'll read this. I only know you'll read it when you need to most. I wrote to the king. I asked him to leave you alone. I was afraid. Afraid that a life beside power is a life consumed by it. Afraid that you had already lost too much to be asked to sacrifice more. I was wrong about the fear. I was right that you'd lost too much. What I didn't understand then was that you would find the way back yourself. You always did. Your father used to say you were the stubbornest creature in 3 counties, and he meant it as the highest possible compliment. Trust the man who stays when you are tired, not the one who comes when you are strong. Anyone will stand beside strength. It is a much rarer thing to stand beside a person who is simply trying. He stayed, my love. I think you already know that. I love you, more than I had the words to say while I had the time to say it. She was in the south garden, her south garden now, Ashveil's garden, when the gate opened. The latch caught and released in the specific way of a gate that had been opened too many times to close fully. She had not yet had it repaired. She was not sure she would. She did not need to look to know who it was. She had catalogued the sound of his footstep months ago, and had stopped trying to uncatalogue it. He had come alone. No escort, no standard, just a man on the road in November. You came, she said. I came. He stopped a few feet from her bench. In the cold morning light, she looked at him and found that she had stopped reaching for words that didn't fit. He looked like himself. That was the only accurate thing, and it turned out to be the only necessary one. I read my mother's letter, she said. He waited. She said she was wrong to ask you to stay away. She turned the seal of Ashveil over in her hands. She had been holding it when he arrived, the habit of it, the warm, worn bronze that had come from her father's coat pocket into hers. She said to trust the man who stays when I am tired. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere above the south wall, a bird called once, twice, and was answered. And then there was only the cold air and the smell of frostbitten stone, and the faint sweetness she had forgotten was there. You stayed, she said, when it would have been easier to keep your distance, when I gave you every reason to. She looked at him. That's not nothing. He said nothing. He extended his hand, open, unhurried, no demand in the gesture, an offering rather than a claim. She looked at his hand. The warmth of him reached her across the short distance between them. The particular warmth she had noticed a dozen times in a dozen different rooms without ever letting herself name it. She looked at his face. The gray of his eyes had gone warm in the morning light, in the way she had only seen twice before, once at midnight over the river city, once in the moment before she walked, unarmed, into the Ironback camp. The look of a man who had stopped performing composure and simply was. She placed her hand in his. Not a promise, not a vow, nothing that required a ceremony or a seal or a scribe to make it real. Just a choice. Hers. The choice was enough. Above, at the solar window, Mira looked down at the garden for exactly 4 seconds. Finally, she said, to no one in particular. Then she closed the shutters and went back to her mending, and left them to whatever came next.